This is the second to last week of the first series of the Jesus Season 2016, which is a period of time for our church between Christmas and Easter, the bookend events of Jesus' life where we focus on him, what he was all about, what he taught as represented in the Gospels of your Bible. Let me back away just for 1 second and maybe tell you something that you haven't heard someone overtly say to you, but the minute that I do, for those of you who have any history in church, you'll go, oh yeah, that's right. Really, when it comes to Sunday morning teaching like this, there are really only two kinds of series, two ways of going about the teaching process, and you have to make a choice about which one you're going to do. One of them is we figure out what question we want to ask the Bible, and then we go to the Bible and ask it. For instance, like when we do the question and answer series in the summer, that's kind of how we handle it. You ask me the question, and then I go do my best to give you a biblical response to your question. Or if we want to find out what the Bible has to say about money or parenting or marriage, we go to the Bible and we ask it. This is a very good way to go about learning from the eternal truth of Scripture. The other way of approaching the Bible is not to set the agenda yourself. And what you do is you go to the Scripture and you say, today, my heart and my mind, my life is going to be open to what you have to say. And I don't know what it's going to be. But I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to listen. I'm going to absorb what it is you have to say. You be the one to set the agenda. Half of the series that we do here are actually that form. This series is that way, where we just wanted to look at some of the encounters that people had with Jesus in the Gospel of Luke and figure out why it is they were so transfixed by him, why they came to him. Then we want to be flies on the wall. We want to watch and listen and grow because of that encounter. And what we'll learn along the way is why Jesus has been now for 2,000 years such a transcendent figure in human history. Today, you get to have the experience of encountering one of, I believe, the most compelling figures in all four of your Gospels. If you have much exposure to the stories of Jesus or the histories of Jesus in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, called the Gospels, sometimes you encounter people that you can't forget. Yeah, this is like that today. This is a story some of you who have any tenure in church may know, but just because you've heard it before, don't let that stop you from listening with an open heart and an open mind and being moved by what you hear today. The first thing I want to do for you is I just want to tell you the story because it is that good a story. And I want you to hear the story or experience the story the way that somebody in Jesus' world 2,000 years ago in his culture would have experienced the story. This story comes to us in the last part of the Gospel of Luke. Actually, it's in your reading for the week if you're reading through the Gospel of Luke. It syncs up this week. We are told that one of the Jewish leaders, called a Pharisee, wanted Jesus to come eat with him. Pharisees were intrigued by Jesus every bit as much as the common folk. They weren't always happy with him, but they were intrigued by him. And so this Pharisee, who you will find out later is named Simon, invites Jesus over for a dinner party at his house, where, yes, all of the Pharisees' friends and other dignitaries and other leaders would be there so they could get to know Jesus and ask Jesus all kinds of questions and probably be baffled by Jesus anew. And we are told that in the midst of this party, there was a woman in the city who was known to be a sinner, and she learned that Jesus was eating at this Pharisee's house. So she came, and she brought with her a jar of expensive ointment. We don't know this woman's name in the story. In fact, in this story, this woman's never going to speak. And yet for a woman who never utters a word, you're never going to forget her. In fact, if you know the story, I'm sure it's already left a mark on you because it is that powerful. Here's a woman who in this small town, could be hundreds of people, could be 1,000 people or so, she is a notorious sinner. That is one way of translating that verse. Meaning, I don't know what she did, but it was flagrant enough that everybody knew it. She wore it on her sleeve. Everybody knew what her problems were. It is safe to assume that this woman had never been in this Pharisee's house, ever. In fact, that will become explicit later in the story. So this woman hears that Jesus is eating at a religious leader's house, one of the good people in town, the pastor's house. And she takes the courage to go someplace that she's never been and she's not welcome. And she crashes the party just to see Jesus. This scandalous, notorious woman goes to seek Jesus out. This is not uncommon, however. If you're familiar with the Gospels, you understand that Jesus is always having the worst kind of people seek him out. In fact, it is one of the accusations made about him over and over again. He's a friend to sinners and tax collectors. He likes gluttons and drunkards. They seem to be attracted to him, and he seems to welcome them. She brings with her an alabaster jar of ointment. This is most likely very expensive perfumed oil, something like in that culture that would be called nard, N-A-R-D. If it is that kind of thing, then this is a very valuable item. Could be worth $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in our common or contemporary way of measuring money. It was very likely her dowry. You know what a dowry is? In that culture, that's the thing that you give to your potential husband's family so that you can be married. Now, it's very likely, given this woman's reputation, she was not married, nor would she have been married, because no one in that town, knowing who she was, being a good Jewish man, would have ever married her. But this was the last nail in the coffin. By taking this perfume to this party and doing what she does with it down in the bottom part of this first slide, she was pretty much assuring she would never be married. But she cared about Jesus this much and was moved by him so much that she came. And silently she stood behind him, and all she could do was cry and pour out this expensive ointment that wore her marital hopes on his feet and wash them with her hair. This was just as strange or outlandish behavior then. It's not like women ran around doing this for their husbands or anything, as it strikes you now. This is singular behavior toward Jesus. And when Simon the Pharisee saw this, he thought to himself, if this Jesus guy were really a religious leader or a prophet, he wouldn't let that kind of person do that to him. No Pharisee like Simon would have ever been in the same place with this woman because of her reputation and her character. Even any good Jewish man wouldn't have been seen in public with this woman, let alone let this woman touch him in this intimate way, in this caring way. Simon's questions are valid in his culture. Why is Jesus, as a Jewish man and a religious leader, letting this woman do this for him, to him? Why? Jesus then spoke up and said, Simon, I have something to say to you. If you're a Pharisee and Jesus says that to you, you need to duck. Jesus knows how Pharisees think. He's engaged with them. He's debated with them for several years now by this point in his ministry. Could he read Simon's mind? He didn't have to. He knew how Simon would react to what was going on. So he says, Simon, I have something to say to you. And then he tells a very short parable or spiritual story. The point is easy enough. Jesus says, hey, there was a guy who was owed two different amounts of money. One was 500 denarii, one was 50. Denarii is a day's pay. So, in modern terms, 500 days' pay at the 2015 American average household income would be about $78,000. Somebody owed this person $78,000, and then somebody else owed this person $7,800. And then Jesus replies, or continues, and says, and this is key in the wording, when they could not pay, that person canceled both of the debts. Which one loved the person who canceled the debt more? Simon gets it right. Well, I suppose it's the one who had the bigger debt canceled. Jesus says, correct. And then he turns toward the woman, and he says to Simon, by the way, do you see that this woman has been washing my feet with her hair and with this ointment? And yet when I entered your house, you didn't even offer me water to wash my feet. In Jesus' day and culture, it was a common courtesy for you to offer someone to be able to wash their feet when they entered your house. Everybody wore sandals. Their feet were messy and dirty and sloppy. It was common courtesy. Like taking off your shoes in the wintertime when you enter somebody's house here. It's common courtesy. And the Pharisee Simon didn't even do that for Jesus. This woman, Jesus continued, hadn't really stopped kissing Jesus' feet out of endearment and adoration for him. And yet Simon, when Jesus entered his home, didn't even offer Jesus a kiss. Why does that matter? Well, in Jewish culture of Jesus' day, anytime anyone of importance or a friend entered your home, maybe even just an honored guest, you would always offer them a kiss on the cheek, even like in some European cultures today. Simon didn't do that for Jesus either. And then last, we're told that this woman poured that very expensive dowry all over Jesus' feet because she cared for him so much. And Jesus points out to Simon, you didn't offer me anything like that. Again, this is common cultural courtesy that Simon chooses not to give to Jesus. If you lived in that day, when you entered someone's house, especially if you had been traveling for a while, they would, when you entered the house, they would have offered you some kind of perfumed oil for your hands, or even to rub in your hair so you didn't smell like the road. You smelled like that. And Simon didn't do that for Jesus. But the woman did something so much more. And you can tell where all this is heading. And it's heading where Jesus says, here where he finishes. He says to Simon, therefore, I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. And because of this, she has shown me great love. But the one to whom little is forgiven loves me very little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. But those who were gathered there, like the Pharisees and his friends who were at the table with Jesus, began to wonder among themselves, who is this that can even forgive sins? And Jesus ignores all that questioning and rumbling and grumbling that's going on around the table, and he looks into that woman's eyes and says to her something she could not believe before she came to him. A hope. He voices to her a hope that she had given up on in her life. And he says to her, and only to her, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. There's a very cool postscript to this story, by the way. The next two verses in the Gospel of Luke, verses 1 and 2 of Luke chapter 8, say that Jesus is traveling around, and he has his disciples with him, and he also has a great big group of women who are following after him and listening to him and being one of his followers, which is very strange in his day because women were not usually allowed to do that. Most commentators on this story would tell you this woman was among those women who became part of Jesus' group of disciples, part of his traveling entourage. All because of this fantastic story told at the end of Luke chapter 7. Now that you have heard the story, the way that somebody would have experienced the story 2,000 years ago in Jesus' culture, what do you hear? How does it affect you? What's the point, do you think? Well, it's hard not to miss, right? But this is a story about contrasts. It's actually a story about two contrasting characters, Jesus being the fulcrum in the middle of both of them. On the one hand, you have Simon the Pharisee, his way of life, his way of dealing with people, his understanding of how God works, his view of spirituality. And then you have the woman who does not speak and yet seeks Jesus out, hoping beyond all hope that he can be the answer to that which she cannot solve for herself. And it is only her who is told at the end of the story, go in peace. What do you think the contrast is in the story of Luke chapter 7 between these two people, these polar opposites? Well, the first thing you're going to see, and you see in spades, is that it makes us wonder, as observers of the story, I wonder how much I need to be forgiven. Because that's exactly how much you are forgiven. Remember the story Jesus tells. Simon gets his socks in a knot, doesn't understand why Jesus would even allow this woman in his presence. Doesn't he understand that just the mere presence of this woman corrupts him as a leader, makes him, in the verbiage of Jewish religion of the day, he's spiritually unclean just because he's allowing this woman to touch him, and he doesn't care. And Jesus replies with that short story, that short parable about debt. He says there are two kinds of people. There are those who owe a lot and those who think they owe a little. Which kind of person are you? Simon the Pharisee thought he needed to be forgiven very little. This woman had no illusions. She knew she needed to be forgiven much. Here's how Jesus talks about this contrast elsewhere in the Gospels. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 13, he says there are two kinds of people. There are the sick and there are the well. He came for the sick because the sick know that they need a physician. The well don't think so. But maybe even more poignant, and I actually had a very lengthy conversation with someone this week about this. In very famous verses in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 to 5, Jesus sets out this contrast. There are two ways to go through life. You can think that everybody else around you in the world has problems and makes mistakes, has sins that are like a log in their eye. And you can think that your mistakes and errors and foibles are just a little speck of dust in yours. Or you can flip it. And you can choose to go through life realizing that your mistakes, your foibles, your weaknesses are actually the size of a log in your own eye. And that too often we overestimate the mistakes of other people. How do you choose to go through life? Do you need to be forgiven much, or do you need to be forgiven little? Let me tell you, based on this story and other examples like the ones I mentioned in the Gospels, much about your spiritual life is going to be determined by how you answer this question. You will either, if you answer it one way, turn out looking like Simon the Pharisee, or you're going to end up being freed, like this notoriously sinful woman who was told to be at peace. One or the other. You have to pick. Here are a couple of quotes to help you maybe ponder which route is the right way, the route toward liberation and freedom. This is a great Christian writer, French philosopher, who lived during the era of World War II named Simone Weil. She says, quote, "Grace, forgiveness, fills empty spaces," like this woman in Luke 7. Grace fills empty spaces, but it can only enter where there is a void to fill. Jesus would have been very willing to forgive Simon, the Pharisee. He didn't think he needed it, and therefore grace was ineffective. Grace fills empty spaces, but only if there's a void to fill. This is how the great Presbyterian pastor of our day in New York City, Tim Keller, says it. Quote, "We can lose God's love not in spite of our goodness, but because of it. It is not our sins that create a barrier between us and our Heavenly Father. It's the pride we have in our moral goodness. It's not our wrongdoing, but our rightness that oftentimes keeps us from God." Oh, there it is. That's the contrast between the notoriously sinful woman of Luke 7 and Simon the Pharisee, who couldn't believe that she crashed his party. Who will you be? It is very easy for us to think that at some point we outgrow the need for God's grace. That at some point we leave all of the big errors aside that we made early on, and we get better over time. You know, this is actually not the way it tends to work. What has your experience of spiritual growth been? I'll bet you've seen in your own life, as you've followed Jesus, that there are issues in your life, maybe anger, maybe addiction, maybe not paying enough attention to your kids and too much attention to your job. I bet there are things in your life you have seen him over time help you with, make headway against. I'll bet that's true. Here's what's also true. As that happens, your eyes are open to other things that you weren't even aware of that were mistakes, or that you had gotten wrong, or you just weren't seeing right, or you weren't prioritizing correctly. And this is how it goes. He takes you over one hurdle, you're over the one hurdle, you look out ahead of you and you see two more. It's as if the spiritual life is not necessarily growing upward, it's going deeper. And as you grow deeper, you realize, wow, it's going to take a lifetime for God to untie the knot that is my human heart. To untie these natural urges that I have to judge other people, to dislike people who are different from me, to be impatient, to be afraid. These are things whose roots go so deep into my soul, it seems like it's almost impossible to extract them. This is what spirituality is really like. And that's why you are never without need of much forgiveness. And the good news is, like this woman knew, you do not have to be afraid of Jesus. So often we think that we do. So often we are embarrassed by coming to God with our same old problems, or the mistake that we've made a dozen times, or with something new after he just helped us get over something old, and we're afraid. Let this woman be instructive to you. I do not know who you have to fear in your life because of your sin, but let me tell you who you never have to fear about your sin. Jesus. He will receive you the same way he did this woman, whose sins were notorious and flagrant and known to everybody. And instead of pushing her away or throwing her out, laughing at her and turning a derisive eye at her, like everyone else at that party would have done, by the way. No. He embraces her. He loves her. He forgives her. And he says, go in peace. There is no fear in admitting how flawed you and I can be, and that we don't get over it with age. It just changes. And the reason there is no fear is because we have Jesus. You see that, yes? You live your life, as Simone Weil said, always knowing that there is a void inside of you that needs to be filled, and the only thing that can fill it is God's grace. There is freedom in that. Or as Tim Keller said, knowing that your moral rightness is never going to be enough for you to feel okay. And that oftentimes your smug sense of accomplishment or how far you've come is the one thing that actually gets in the way of you having intimacy with God your Father. No. Be someone who till your dying day needs much forgiveness. And in so doing, you will find much peace. Did you catch what to me is in this story one of the most fascinating things that Jesus says? In fact, I don't know that it is said as clearly anywhere else in the Bible. But it seems to me to be very important. Did you catch it? So this woman comes, crashes the party, and then Jesus begins to explain to Simon why it's so good that she sought him out. Why it's so right that she came to him to put the pieces of her life back together. He says there's these two people, someone who owed a lot, someone who owed a little. And they both had their debts forgiven. And then his question to Simon was, quote, "Who do you think loves the person who forgave the debt more?" He uses the word loves. And Simon, in his reply, uses the word love too. Well, I suppose it's the one who was forgiven much. And then Jesus says, you're absolutely right, Simon. Those who need to be forgiven much, in turn, love Jesus tons. Let me say it to you this way. The key to your devotion to Jesus, the key to your faithfulness to Jesus over the long haul of your life is how much you think he needs to forgive you. It is not your fortitude. It is not your endurance. It is not your goodness. It is not the things that you do to serve him and other people. That which makes you love Jesus is that you think he has forgiven you much. Listen to the way that one Christian writer named Joseph Stoll says that, because that is an extraordinary idea. Quote, he says, mark it down. Loving Jesus is a response to his enduring, unwarranted love for us. His amazing grace motivates us like nothing else to live out our lives in a unique and, when necessary, courageous way that expresses our honor of him. When the chips are down or the stakes are high, mere commitment is not enough to get us through. But loving Jesus because he forgives us is. You buy that? Think about this. Let's take it out of the terms of your relationship with God Almighty. And I want to validate this idea that Jesus talks about in Luke 7 with your relationships with other people. Who are the people that you love the most in your life? Now, if you have family, it's your family, right? It's your kids, it's your spouse, it's your parents. Maybe it's good friends that you have who have been as loyal to you as family, and they have stuck by you like family. Great. Look at those people and think, what are the traits about them that make me love them so much? Why am I so glued to them Why are they so endearing to me? Why? Let me suggest to you that as you think that, one of the reasons is they've forgiven you a lot. These are the people around whom you've blown it big. You may have even hurt them personally in a deep way. And yet, they allowed the Spirit of God in them to prompt in them great forgiveness and grace to you. They loved you anyway. They worked on repairing the hurt that was done. And you've come through it, and now you're stronger because of it. And people like that are rare in this world. But when you find one, you cling to them like a life raft. You know this. You have people like that. That's why I'm convinced, by the way, that one of the things the New Testament over and over says to the early churches, as the apostles write these letters that are most of your New Testament to the various churches in the Roman Empire, that one of the things Christians in churches like this should do is forgive one another. For instance, Colossians chapter 3, verse 13 says, you forgive each other the way that the Lord Jesus has forgiven you. Why? Because it makes you love each other, that's why. Nothing bonds people together like forgiving each other. It's what Jesus said about how you'll treat him. Want to know the key to your devotion to Jesus today, over the long haul of your life? Let him forgive you a lot, and you'll never stop loving him. You can flip that around, by the way. If you entered in here today, maybe like Simon the Pharisee, at arm's length with Jesus, maybe you would claim the name of Christian for yourself, but the truth is when you think about something like loving Jesus or being devoted to Jesus, that concept is lost on you. Let me suggest at least here's one possible reason why. It's because you don't think you need to be forgiven a whole lot. And so you're cordial to Jesus, you acknowledge that he was a good man and had some nice things to say, but you're not going to give him your life. You're not going to open your heart to him. You're not going to love him as deeply and as passionately as you love your husband or your wife. It's not going to happen. It isn't happening. Why is that? Well, according to Jesus in this story, it's because you don't think you need to be forgiven a whole lot. You see that? The one who is forgiven much loves much. The one who is forgiven little loves little. And at the end of this story, in maybe one of the most poignant verses you will run across as you read through the Gospel of Luke, there is one and only one person who is told, your faith has saved you, go in peace. And it's the woman who didn't utter a word, but had the courage to bring the shambles of her life to Jesus and be forgiven. There are lots of ways in this world for you and I to seek peace of mind. In fact, you may not use that phrase, but I would say of everybody in the room here today, all of us in our own way are trying to find peace of mind. You may not have known that, but unconsciously, it's what we all want. We want to feel stable. We want to feel serene. We want our hearts and minds to be tranquil, quiet and still. Of course we do. How's the world around you try to do that? They try to have the right hobbies. They try to have the right relationships. They try to be married to the right person. They try to have enough money. They try to enjoy every day as much as they can. Maybe they meditate. Some of those are good options. Some of those are better than others. Here in Luke chapter 7 is a very different way of understanding peace. Simon the Pharisee thought the way to peace is to be a good person. Simon the Pharisee thought the way to peace is to hang out with the right people, the respectable people, the people of good reputation. Simon the Pharisee thought the way to peace is to be thought of well by other people, to be held in high esteem. Simon the Pharisee thought to be at peace with people Or to have peace in my life is to serve people. Pharisees were religious leaders. Their lives were about serving and caring for other people. This is what Simon thought. This is Simon's way of looking at the world. He is not the one in the story who left at peace. The way to peace, according to Jesus in this story, is you come to Jesus as you are, whatever that is, at any given moment. You come as you are, and you know that he never turns anybody away. Moreover, you know he is like the father in the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15, and he is looking for you to come home. And the person in the universe who has the least amount of misgivings about your mistakes is him, because he cares about you more than your sin. And with courage and great faith in the character of Jesus, you come running or you come limping with whoever you are at that given moment. And sometimes you don't even say a word, like the woman in this story. You just kneel in his presence and you let him love you. You let him forgive you. And you believe, you have faith that this is what the world is really like. This is how the kingdom of God works. This is the universe that God is trying to birth through his Son and his Son's people, the church. And as you believe that, peace descends. There is no peace in the world like the peace grace gives you. None. You can seek your whole life, read every book you can, find all the religious wisdom you can, make as much money as you can, have the best hobbies in the world you can, have the most beautiful wife you can, and nothing will give you peace like grace. Nothing. Ask this woman. She knew. How will you find peace in your life? Let me suggest to you the only way is through much forgiveness. I hope today you were moved by this story of contrasts about one of the most compelling figures you're going to run across in the Gospels. This story that really showed you two ways of life, two routes to personal peace. Route 1 is Simon the Pharisee. Route 2 is the woman who sought Jesus out and had faith that he could put her back together. Which route will you choose as you move forward from here? This is what Richard Foster, one of the great writers in Christianity today about the spiritual life, has to say about what you saw in the way of this woman in Luke chapter 7. What it tells you about what real Christian spirituality is, what a real relationship with Jesus is like. If I know, quote, if I know that the people of God are first a fellowship of sinners, then we are freed to hear the unconditional call of God's love. We know that we are not alone in our sin. The fear and pride which cling to us like barnacles cling to others too. We are sinners, one and the same. And when we admit that or confess that, it is then that God's power is released to heal us. That is the way of the woman in Luke chapter 7.